They buried her just before noon, and by dusk the headstones faded into fog and the last car rolled away. But Raymond Ellison remained. Decorated veteran, former high school teacher, father of 2, and widower. At 78, he had outlived the battlefield and the classroom but wasn't ready to outlive her. He stood beside Delia's grave, her name freshly etched, his posture stiff with memory. He wore the suit she loved, pressed sharp as if preparing for a ceremony. A single rose, cut from their backyard bush, rested in his trembling hand. The winter soil had not yet settled over her, and the air carried a brittle silence, the kind that comes after hymns and hugs have faded. Time became a strange thing, at once dragging and racing. Raymond whispered a line of frost, something about promises and miles. He closed his eyes. He could still hear her laugh, that low melodic hum like river water over stone. The parking lot emptied behind him. Fog crept along the ground, swallowing headstones and pathways. Church bells rang somewhere distant. He did not flinch. His knees ached, but he stayed rooted. When the red and blue lights cut through the haze and a voice barked, "You're trespassing," Raymond didn't move. He knew where he was. This was ground made sacred by love. A young officer emerged from the cruiser, hand on holster, posture wary. "Sir, cemetery's closed. I need you to leave." Raymond didn't turn. "I buried my wife today." The officer hesitated. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules." Raymond's hand closed tighter around the rose. His voice, though quiet, carried, "She followed me through every battle. I'm not leaving her behind." The officer called in backup. Procedure hummed in his ear. But Raymond remained, unmoving, a lone figure in a fog-draped cemetery, bound not by rebellion, but by memory. Before Delia, there was noise. Jungle heat, bullets carving the air, a radio buzzing with coded breathlessness. Captain Raymond Ellison learned to keep his voice steady when chaos exploded around him. In Vietnam, he memorized maps like scripture, moved his men with clockwork precision, and wrote letters home on stolen scraps of silence. Most were addressed to D, always sealed with care, always folded as if carrying more than words. He wrote her once from a rooftop at the Saigon embassy in '73, helicopters thudding overhead. That letter he never sent. Instead, he sealed it in a velvet pouch and kept it close. He met Delia at a county library in Georgia in 1968, weeks before deployment. She was reshelving Steinbeck when he knocked over a stack of Hemingway. She called him a walking hurricane, and he asked if she believed in love that waited. "I believe in return dates," she replied with a grin. It was the first time Raymond ever feared something more than war, missing his chance. Delia wrote him every week while he was gone. Sometimes whole pages, sometimes just a quote. "Live in the layers," she once scribbled, referencing Retke. When he returned with a limp and a medal, she greeted him with a copy of Leaves of Grass and a kiss that turned silence into music. They married in autumn, surrounded by golden maples and borrowed chairs. No fanfare, just family and the kind of vows made between souls already tried by distance. Raymond traded fatigues for tweed and chalk dust. He became Mr. Ellison, 10th grade literature teacher at Rentsfield High. His students never knew the soldier behind the board, only the man who turned lessons into lifelines. He taught them not just how to read, but how to listen. He asked questions that made silence thoughtful. "What does Baldwin mean by witness?" he'd ask, and then let the silence stretch until someone dared to answer. Delia sat at the kitchen table proofreading his lesson plans, circling comma splices, laughing at his awful margins. She was the first to read his school essays, the first to cry at student poems. When he chaperoned field trips or stayed late helping with college essays, she waited up with tea and slippers. They had 2 children, Samuel, who moved to Oregon to raise goats and write software, and Ava, who became a social worker in Cleveland. The house grew quieter with years, but never empty. Delia filled it with orchids, wind chimes, and the scent of lemon cake. Then came the day when her fingers trembled on the coffee mug. "Just a tremor," she said. Then the bruises, unexplained. The cough that lingered. It was cancer. Late stage. Raymond, who had once patched wounds in the jungle with nothing but gauze and grit, now stood powerless in a fluorescent-lit room, watching monitors and beeping machines chart her retreat. He read to her every evening. Dickinson, Angelou, even pages from the old essays his students had written. She insisted on brightness, bring the funny ones. She refused morphine until the very end. "I want to feel your hand," she told him, even when pain eclipsed everything. Raymond held it gently, careful not to break the delicate skin. In her final week, Delia asked, "Do you still have that letter?" Raymond nodded. "From Saigon?" "Yes. You said someday. I think now's good." He brought the pouch, velvet worn thin from decades. He didn't open it. He simply held it between them, as though offering proof that some promises never grow old. She kissed it once, eyes closing. "You always kept your word. The night she died, the nurse whispered, she waited for you to fall asleep. Then she let go." Raymond didn't cry. He sat up straight, watching the dark window as if expecting dawn to arrive just for him. When he returned home, the house was unchanged. Her coat still hung by the door. Her handwriting still marked grocery lists. Her pillow still smelled of lavender. He called Samuel and Ava, who booked flights and arrived with casserole dishes and swollen hearts. The funeral was planned with quiet dignity, no speeches, no eulogies, just music and flowers. Delia had written a note years ago, "Don't let them make it a sad thing. Let them know I loved fiercely." Raymond followed her wishes. But after the last hymn faded and hands were shaken and embraces exchanged, the ache bloomed. He felt unanchored, adrift in a world where her voice was now memory. He went through her things slowly. A photo from their wedding tucked inside her gardening book. A dried violet in her Bible. A worn copy of a movable feast with her notes in the margins. Then he found the envelope again. The one he had meant to give her years ago. He sat at their old dining table, turned on the lamp with the stained glass shade she adored, and opened it for the first time. Inside were his words, scrawled in the uneven handwriting of a soldier under siege. "If I don't make it back, know I loved you like breath. If I do, marry me. Build a quiet life with me. Read me poetry when I forget who I am. And if someday you go before I do, wait for me just beyond the edge of sky." Raymond folded the letter back into its pouch and placed it inside his coat. He would carry it to her grave, not as a soldier or a teacher, but simply as her husband. When the last guest drove away, he remained, because goodbye wasn't a moment, but a devotion. And some devotions outlast time. 3 years after Delia's passing, Raymond lived by ritual. He rose at 6:30, made black coffee, and ate a single slice of toast, no butter. Her absence no longer startled him, but it lived in the corners like sunlight that refused to leave. On Mondays and Thursdays, he walked to the community center. Once an old train depot, it had become a haven for retirees, domino games, watercolor classes, and crossword debates. He joined the memoir group. Not because he fancied himself a writer, but because Delia would have nudged him toward it. "Write it down before it fades," she'd have said. At first, he only listened. Filled a yellow notebook with thoughts, rain-soaked letters, jungle skies, Delia's peach pie. He didn't bother with punctuation. One entry read, "She laughed with her whole mouth, never worried who heard." He began noticing a woman named Florence. She wore a navy scarf with birds and spoke in a slow, thoughtful cadence. Her stories, rooted in her years as a nurse in Caracas, had a clarity he admired. One Thursday, she asked, "What are you writing?" "My wife," he said. And what it meant to lose her. Florence didn't offer sympathy. Just nodded. I wrote about the day I stopped wearing my husband's watch. Took me 4 years. That honesty settled something in him. The next week, he read aloud a piece about the night Delia fell asleep in his arms after an argument. The room fell still. When he finished, no one clapped. Florence placed a hand on his shoulder. That's what remembering sounds like. At night, Raymond walked his neighborhood. Fewer children, more silence. Porch lights blinked like distant stars. Sometimes, he spoke aloud, not to himself, but to her. Thought of you at the bakery today, he'd say. They had those lemon tarts. He paused often at the footbridge over the dry creek. No name. No plaque. Just stillness. One evening, he left a copy of one of his writings beneath it, wrapped in plastic. If someone finds it, he said, maybe they'll remember something too. In early spring, Ava came with her boys. Samuel had taken a new job, less tech, more goats. Ava also brought a proposal. They're launching a writing seminar at the college, she said. They want a guest speaker. I thought of you. Raymond shook his head. I'm not a writer. You are, she said. You just didn't know. 2 weeks later, he stood behind a podium in a quiet classroom. He read from his notebook, voice steady. He didn't embellish war or grief. Just spoke the truth as it lived inside him. When he finished, a student raised her hand. How do you move on from someone who made life feel safe? Raymond considered. You don't. You carry them, not like a weight. Like a compass. That thought echoed days later when Florence handed him a hand-drawn map of the town. Each spot labeled with memories. Here's where I saw you smile. Here's where I think healing began. He kept it next to Delia's letter from Saigon. That June, he visited the cemetery with lilacs. Brushed leaves from her name. You'd like Florence, he whispered. She doesn't try to fix me. He hesitated. I still carry the letter. But I've been thinking, maybe it's time I write the other half. The part about after. That evening, he sat in Delia's old chair by the window, the notebook open. The room was dim, touched only by the last light of day. I promised you a quiet life. I didn't promise it would be quiet after. I read once that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. Some days, you feel like air. Some days, like a question. I'm trying to answer you. The memoir group decided to publish an anthology. Florence asked him to write the foreword. I'm no good at beginnings, he told her. But you've lived one, she said. Write what came before. He did. The first line read, to remember is to love twice. The printed book made its rounds. Ava framed a page from it in her hallway. Samuel wrote him a letter. Raymond didn't crave validation, but something in him quieted when Florence read his words aloud on launch night. After meetings, he and Florence walked together. Words weren't necessary. Steps in rhythm were enough. One evening, she handed him a thermos of mint tea. If you want company on the quiet nights, she said, my porch has room. He didn't say yes. But he didn't say no. On a warm evening that felt like change, Raymond stood at the bridge. Fireflies danced. He whispered, still yours, D. But maybe there's more story left. From his coat, he pulled the letter from Saigon. He read it one final time, then set it gently into the creek. It floated, then disappeared beneath the surface. He didn't cry. He smiled. And turned for home. The fall semester passed with the quiet dignity of fading leaves. Raymond, now somewhat of a fixture on campus, returned weekly to meet a small group of students for storytelling sessions. They called it Memoir Circle, though he disliked titles. He preferred to think of it as sitting with echoes. Florence joined him once, not to speak, but to observe. "You light up in here," she said afterward, her voice soft as October wind. He smiled and shook his head. "They remind me the world still spins." At home, he rearranged his living room for the first time in years. Moved Delia's chair by the bookshelf, brought in a second reading lamp. Not erasing her, never that, but reshaping the space around her memory. He opened the windows more often, let in the crisp air. Once, he caught himself humming while doing dishes. Ava visited less, now busy with her own world. But she sent postcards, sketches from her boys, clumsy and joyful, stuck with magnets to his fridge. He wrote back letters she would never expect her father to write, poetic, at times funny, always real. In one, he confessed, "The past used to feel like a heavy coat. Now it's more like a threadbare scarf, frayed, sure, but comforting." That winter, Florence fell ill. Nothing dramatic, just a deep cough that turned into a hospital stay. Raymond brought books and lavender tea. He read aloud to her in the afternoons, selections from her own writings. She teased, "My voice sounds better in your mouth." "You're not dying," he warned. "I'm not," she joked. "Shame. I was going to request a grand Viking funeral. Something with torches." When she came home, she used a cane for a while. Raymond helped her plant bulbs beneath her windows, daffodils and crocus. "For spring," she said. "Even if I don't see them bloom." He found he missed her more than he expected when she wasn't around. That surprised him, like stumbling over a familiar song after years. The kind you remember the words to without trying. For New Year's, the memoir group gathered at the community center. Someone brought cider, another baked too many cookies. Florence wore a silver shawl and sat beside him like they'd done it forever. At midnight, someone read a toast, to the stories we've lived, the ones we've told, and the ones still waiting. Florence squeezed his hand. In February, Raymond discovered a dusty folder tucked in a filing cabinet, old letters he wrote Delia but never sent. Most were from Vietnam. Some were simply fragments, a sketch of a mountain, a note about a dream. One read, "If I come home, and we grow old, promise me we'll still chase thunderstorms." He shared some of them at the next memoir circle. A student named Celia cried quietly. "My grandfather served too," she said. "But he never talked about it. Thank you for this." He walked home that night feeling both hollowed and whole. On a Sunday in March, Florence invited him to her porch. They drank tea with honey and watched the wind move through the trees. "I want to ask something," she said. "Ask. Would you ever consider traveling again? Not far. Just somewhere new." He stared into the steam of his mug. "I haven't been on a plane in years." "We wouldn't have to fly," she said. "There's a train that goes along the coast." He thought of the tracks behind the old depot, the way sound used to carry at dusk. "All right," he said. "Let's chase a few thunderstorms." They left in April. Took the coastal route, stopping in small towns. He brought his notebook. She brought her camera. At each station, they wandered. Bought postcards. Listened to people talk about local legends and lost dogs and the best pie in town. In a harbor town, they met a retired sailor who taught Raymond how to tie a bowline knot. "Ties fast," the man said. "But only if you know where the loop begins." Raymond scribbled that down. Later, on a hotel balcony, he read the note aloud. Florence looked out at the sea. "That's what you are to me. A good knot. Steady. But not too tight." He didn't speak. Just reached for her hand. They returned home with sand in their shoes and new pages in their journals. Spring arrived in full bloom. The daffodils under her window stretched toward the light like they'd been waiting for her. One afternoon, Florence kissed him. Not a grand gesture, just a slow, sure press of meaning. Raymond didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. Just leaned in. "I'm still hers," he said later. "I know," Florence whispered. "I'm not asking you not to be." The next memoir session, he read something new. Not about Delia. Not about war. About now. "Some memories are roots," he told the group. "But some are wings." Afterward, Florence left early. A student asked, "Is she your partner?" Raymond paused. "We're something. Something kind and true." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat with his notebook and wrote a poem. The first in years. A second spring. It comes quieter. Not with the blaze of youth. But with the hush of steady hands. And the knowing nod of time. It doesn't ask you to forget. Only to look again. And maybe. Just maybe. To stay. He didn't read it to anyone. Not yet. But he folded it and placed it inside the book Delia had once underlined. A quiet offering to the past, and a whisper toward whatever came next. That Sunday, he called Ava. Told her about the daffodils, the train, and Florence's shawl that glimmered like moonlight. There was a pause. "You sound happy, Dad," she said. He nodded, though she couldn't see. "I think I might be." Raymond's days settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings were unhurried, tea steeping in the kitchen, the scent of lemon balm drifting through the open windows. Sometimes, he wrote. Sometimes, he just sat. Silence had stopped feeling like a void. Florence began visiting more often. She brought fresh bread, books, or simply her presence. They'd sit on the porch, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. It wasn't awkward. It felt earned. One morning, Raymond stopped by the college library. Celia, the student from the reading, met him with a wide grin. "Dr. Hall's been asking about you." Inside, Professor Hall said, "Raymond, we'd like to offer you something, a short creative nonfiction seminar. Memoir-based. Just 8 weeks. I think you'd be extraordinary." Raymond hesitated. "I'm no teacher." "You already are," Hall replied. That evening, he told Florence. She smiled. "You're being asked to do something that scares you. That's usually where the good things hide." He took the position, stipulating a small class, 8 students. They called it Living Memory. On the first day, he brought nothing but a question: what moment made you who you are? They hesitated, but slowly, stories emerged. A lost sibling. A letter from prison. A funeral where no one cried. Raymond listened, commented sparingly. His feedback wasn't technical, it was human. And the students responded. He told stories too, not as confession, but invitation. "We're not remembering just to remember," he said. "We're remembering to continue." Ava visited with the boys in late spring. They stayed a weekend, filling the house with noise and crumbs. Theo, the youngest, asked, "Grandpa, why don't you have a dog?" Raymond smiled. "I did. A long time ago. You should get another. Everyone needs someone to run with." That night, Ava helped him clear the dishes. "You seem different," she said. "Lighter. I feel awake. More than I have in years." She glanced at him. "Is it her?" He nodded. "Partly. But it's not just Florence. It's like I remembered how to say yes." She was quiet, then said, "Mom would have liked her." It was the first time she'd acknowledged Delia's absence without flinching. He hugged her for a long time. A few weeks later, he visited the animal shelter. Sadie, an older Labrador with warm eyes and a lazy gait, sat calmly amid the chaos. She came home with him that day, curled up at his feet the moment they entered the house. You get it, he whispered. You know what it's like to be quiet inside. Sadie came with him to class. The students loved her. She'd snore softly as they read aloud, sometimes letting out a dream whimper during poignant silences. Florence planned a short trip in June, a cabin near a lake. No writing, she said. Just floating. They swam in cold water and dried off in the sun. At night, they cooked pasta and drank cheap wine. Sadie sprawled across a braided rug like she owned the place. It was perfect. One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the waterline, Florence said, "When do we stop waiting for life to begin again?" Raymond reached for her hand. "When we realize it already has." They returned home tan, tired, and content. Afterward, he began a new journal, not about the past, but the present. He called it the Quiet Archive. It held small moments, Sadie chasing a bee, Florence singing softly while making coffee, a student crying after sharing a piece. July 4th. Malik read about his father's deportation. No embellishment, just facts, tender and brutal. After class, I told him it was the bravest page I've ever heard. He smiled with his eyes. Said it felt like breaking open and stitching shut at once. July 11th. Florence laughed so hard she snorted. No apology. I kissed her afterward and tasted raspberry jam. These were the moments he never wanted to forget. Then, in August, Florence collapsed at the farmer's market. No drama, just her knees giving out as she reached for a pear. He caught her before she hit the ground. At the hospital, the diagnosis was swift: advanced leukemia. Aggressive. Limited options. She chose clarity over treatment. I want to say goodbye on my terms, she told him. I want to be awake for my exit. Raymond moved into her house. They didn't talk about what was happening every day. Some days were just crossword puzzles and toast. Others were full of questions, soft ones, fierce ones. One night, she whispered, "You're the best surprise I ever found in the dark. You're not leaving yet." I know. But if I do, you'll carry me, right? Not like a wound. Like a flame. He kissed her hand. I already do. Outside, summer slowly unraveled. In the yard, sunflowers tilted toward the last of the long light. Sadie rested on the porch, watching the street as if waiting for something beautiful to return. The days slowed. Florence's illness progressed like a silent tide, relentless, but not cruel. She wasn't in pain, not yet, and refused to be mourned while breathing. I'm not gone, she'd remind Raymond, brushing his cheek. Stop looking at me like I'm a poem that ends in ellipses. She asked for simple things. A walk down the block when she had the strength. A playlist of cello music. A fire in the fireplace even when it was warm outside. Let it crackle. I like when things speak in small ways. He obliged every request. He also began recording their conversations, at her suggestion. I want you to have my voice when mine leaves me, she said. It's not for memory. It's for continuation. One afternoon, he asked, Are you scared? Florence didn't answer immediately. Then, not of death. Of missing too much. I didn't always say yes to life. I got good at it too late. He understood that in his bones. By late September, she slept more than she woke. The class ended. The students wrote goodbye letters, which Raymond read aloud to her, one each night. Malik wrote, You made me believe in softness without weakness. You taught me that history isn't always written in stone. Sometimes it's written in someone's open hands. She smiled faintly. He's going to be someone, she whispered. Raymond spent evenings sitting beside her, reading from her favorite books, sometimes rereading old emails she had printed and kept in a wooden box labeled Proof of Joy. Each one was a snapshot of a life that had mattered, scraps of days she had stitched into meaning. October came wrapped in wind. The trees shed their color like skin. Florence asked to be taken outside one last time. Raymond carried her in a blanket to the porch. Sadie lay beside her, head on her foot. "I was so afraid when we met," she murmured. "Afraid to feel again. You made it safe." He kissed her forehead. "You taught me how to live in the silence." They sat there for hours, until the sky turned violet. That night, she didn't wake up. Raymond didn't cry at first. He washed her hands, brushed her hair, folded the blanket neatly at the foot of the bed. Then he sat beside her, holding her palm, whispering stories from the last months. "This was your chapter," he said. "The one where everything made sense." The funeral was small, like she wanted. Her sister flew in. A few students. Neighbors. The woman from the bookstore who had always saved her the good titles. They told stories, not eulogies. Raymond read a poem Florence had written when she was 19. It ended, "I am not afraid to go. I'm only afraid to have never arrived." After everyone left, Raymond stayed behind, hand on the cold earth. "I arrived," he said. "With you." He returned to an unfamiliar quiet. Sadie whined the first few nights. He left Florence's slippers out, let her scent linger. Eventually, the dog adjusted. Raymond didn't. He thought about leaving. Selling the house, moving closer to Ava. But something tethered him to the space where Florence had lived, where their stories had rooted. Instead, he wrote. The quiet archive grew thicker. He added a second volume. Then a third. This time, it wasn't just memories. It was guidance. Essays, fragments, letters he'd never send but needed to shape. He titled one, On Loving Late and Fully. He rejoined the college in spring, this time as a guest lecturer. They offered him a permanent position. He declined. "I want to be temporary," he told Professor Hall. "So I never forget the urgency of it." New students came. They asked different questions, carried different ghosts. But every term, he taught living memory. And every term, he began with, "What moment made you who you are?" Florence was everywhere. In the music he played before class. In the ink of the pens he gifted each student. He placed a photo of her, smiling beside a sunflower, at the front of the room. When asked who she was, he said, "The moment that made me." Years passed. He grew slower. But the work didn't. The stories kept coming. He published a book, a hybrid of memoir and philosophy, stitched with student stories and Florence's words. The final chapter was just a note. To the one who arrived too late and exactly on time. "I carry you like light." It sold modestly. But he didn't care. He woke one morning in winter with chest pain. Not sharp, just tight, heavy. Like something had finally exhaled. He sat with it. No panic. Just stillness. He made tea, fed Sadie, now older and gray-faced. Then he sat in Florence's chair, wrapped in her quilt, and wrote his final journal entry. The page was blank but full of presence. Outside, snow drifted slowly. He closed his eyes. And let go. Still listening.